no mai, haere mai, kaki mai, piki mai, ki te hui topa, Paneke Pōneke. Welcome to this evening's webinar on the Wellington City Council Bike Network Plan. My name is Esther Buchholz and I am delighted to be your MC and host for this evening. In the manner of all council meetings, we will begin this session with a karakia, a whakataka te hau, which some of you may recognise and which starts all formal council meetings. Me inoi tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atukura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei, mauri ora. Thank you. And now, let us begin. So we are bringing you this webinar as a way, or this online webinar, as a way of reaching more people during consultations on the Bike Network Plan, in addition to meeting with you face to face. And those opportunities, finding out more about those opportunities will be available for you online. But first up, I would like to, we will hear from Mayor Andy Foster, who unfortunately couldn't make it tonight, so he's pre-recorded a session for us this afternoon. And you will also be hearing from several members of the Pōneke planning team, first in presentations and then in a panel. We'll also be letting you know how to make submissions on this plan, and many of you have registered questions with us, which we will be putting to our panel, and if we have time, we'll pick up more live tonight. So, how do you lodge your questions? You will see the question and answer buttons. Depending on what kind of screen you're using, run your mouse along the bottom or the top, pop them in there. If we have time at the end of the session, we will take those. And if you don't get your question answered, no problem. Go to the Bike Network at wcc.gov.net/nz to get .gov.nz to get them answered. So we have over 75 people registered for this webinar tonight. We'll also be recording it, so if you're not here now with us, you may be watching it afterwards, so welcome to you too. And these are the questions that we have already received from you. So we have a lot of questions about safety, about the design itself, about how car parking will be managed, and about how this serves the community. Also some questions about timeframe. So we'll be putting all of those to the panel. To help our speakers tonight, we'd like you just to answer a poll telling us about your interest in the Bike Network Plan. So could you launch that for us now, Ollie? So how important do you think it is to make it easier and safer for people to ride bicycles in and around the city? Just pop the one that makes most sense to you, and that will help our speakers and our panel understand our audience, so that they can do a better job of answering your questions and speaking to your concerns. So how are we going there, Ollie? How many people have answered so far? How many people have answered that question so far, Ollie?
Yeah, about 90% of people. So.
Oh, fantastic. So let's launch that poll so that you can all see. Very good. So most of you here think that this is very important or important, but there are a few of you who think this is not important. So thank you for that. So we'll be answering questions from both parts of the spectrum, but clearly many of you here are supporters of more biking in the city. So thank you very much for that. So let us flick to who our speakers are tonight. Next slide, please, Ollie. So you'll be hearing firstly from Mayor Andy Foster, followed by presentations. Tonight we have Paul Barker, Transport Planning Manager, who will be speaking on the bigger project principles, and Claire Pascoe, who is the Transition Program Manager, will be digging into the details of the plan and what it looks like. Joe Hewitt will also be joining us on the panel, and the three of them will be answering your questions in more detail. I'd also like to acknowledge Councillor Iona Pannett, who has sent in her apologies, very disappointed that she couldn't make it tonight. And we do have registered tonight Deputy Mayor Sarah Free. So welcome to you too, if you are here. Thank you for that. So let's get started to our first speaker or recording, Mayor Andy Foster. If you could bring that up, Ollie.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Mayor Andy Foster, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on Paneke Pōneke, our 10-year cycleway development program. Look, we all love our city. It's beautiful, it's compact, there's a wonderful, vibrant central city full of arts, culture, events, food. It's an inclusive city. It's a city where we are always close to the harbour or to the hills. We're restoring our natural environment. And today we're talking about making our city even better. We're planning for a growing population. We're also planning for a low carbon future. We want a place of transport choice. We want a place also where our children are able to get to school, to recreation, to the shops on their own in safety. Paneke Pōneke is our 10-year cycleway development program. We're deliberately consulting on Paneke Pōneke along with our new district plan and the Let's Get Wellington Moving program, so that they are all integrated together, transport and urban development. We want people to look at the maps, the routes, the connections, and to help us in refining those plans so they deliver what Wellingtonians want. The name Paneke Pōneke means to pass or move through, very appropriate for cycling. It's also a play on a waka, moving together in unison, and that's what we want to do, to design this program together. It's your city, please get involved and have a say.
Thank you, Mayor Foster. And if we could come back to the slides now, and I would like to introduce Paul Barker, Transport Planning Manager. Come on in, Paul, and share with us the overarching principles and purpose of this design.
Thanks, Esther. Look, I'm trying to turn my camera on. It says the host has stopped it.
Give
right,
that a let's see what magic Ollie can do with that, and thank you very much.
Right. Thank you. Hopefully that's working. Can you?
Yes, we can see
right.
you. We can see you.
I couldn't see myself. Thank you. Look, good evening, everybody. Paul Barker. I'm the Transport Planning Manager here at Council, and I've been here at Council for quite some time, and I've had a responsibility for cycleway development. Now, back in 2015, we developed the master plan for how we were going to take the city forward with cycling. And we've made some progress on it. We've done some fantastic stuff around the bays, through Kilburnie and the connection across to Newtown. Some of the work we've done since 2015, along with the connection along the Hut Road.
Paul,
yes.
Paul, you're a little quiet. If you could speak up a little so that our listeners can hear you well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Look, so we have made some progress, but that progress has been really hard and it's been slow. And we've acknowledged that. When we've gone out earlier this year with our long-term plan aspirations and the feedback we got from the community and the aspirations of our councillors, they've gone and approved a long-term plan that's got an accelerated delivery of the program. So not only have we...
Paul, you're fading out. I'm not sure why. Perhaps take off
we
your...
worked well before.
Yep. Perhaps take off your headset. Okay, sorry, it's just at my end. I'm hearing from Ollie, it's just at my end. Carry on.
Sorry. In adopting the long-term plan in the middle of this year, our council adopted it with a tremendous increase in budget, but with purpose. And they wanted that to be an accelerated delivery of our program, quite a different approach than what we've done previously. The acceleration is for a number of reasons, and it links down to, as we've got there on the bottom of the slide, our climate response vision that we've got, Te Atakura, first to zero. The planning for growth work and the review of our district plan and dealing with the increased population that we expect to have here in Wellington over the next 30 to 50 years. And of course, the Let's Get Wellington Moving program, the big transformational transport changes that we're going to see throughout the city. So we've been busy since the council approved this new work back in June, developing a new bike network plan. And that's the Paneke Pōneke that we're presenting here tonight. The plan through there is that we consult now, we get a decision on that bike network early in the new year, and then we scale up and start to deliver. So we'd be in a position to deliver that network from early next year. Now, rather than wait till then, we've made a start. So we've got approval from our councillors to start on 2 projects. And as we go through this presentation tonight, Claire Pascoe is going to talk about those, but our first 2 projects is the Botanic Gardens through into the city and Newtown through into the city. And we'll get some more details on that later tonight as we go through this presentation. Next slide, thanks, Ollie. And so why are we doing? I've touched on some of that, but the city's changing. Our city is changing. It's a city we love, and we want more of what we like in the city. And we think that through here, as we heard from Bear Foster, that the Paneke Pōneke is going to give us more of the city we want. We have both a climate crisis and a housing crisis, and that's been acknowledged by this community, this council, and more centrally. What we don't have, though, is a transport crisis. We are not here to improve transport across the city. We're dealing with our planning effects for growth and our climate emergency. Sorry, next slide, Ollie. Thank you. Look, and so the way we are going to move about our city with the changes to reflect our low carbon transport system and our increased population is going to have to change. But what we're showing here is that it's not going to change going forward. It has been changing for some time now. We've been tracking the number of cyclists or number of people that bike into the city since 2000, and we're one of the few road controlling authorities in the country that's been doing this for this period of time. But it's showing some tremendous growth. And we've for 1 week in March, for 5 mornings in that week, we count the number of people walking, those on bikes, and the people on buses that are coming across the cordon into the city. And you can see that the measurements from that have shown that we've more than doubled the number of people coming into the city at that time. We're also hearing from people, and the work we did back in 2014 when we asked the community about support for cycling showed that then there was a 76% share for requests for more cycling. People would cycle more often if there was provision made for them. And that's been consistent. We've seen that over the last 7 years, that there is this overwhelming support for more safer, more direct provision for people on bikes. And we've got some of the increases in e-bikes, and we're seeing that in Wellington, we've probably got one of the biggest uptakes in purchase of e-bikes, and not just for recreation. These are used extensively throughout the day from all ages. We've seen a high proportion on our commuter routes. There's the figures there in that bottom corner, but they are used by everybody throughout the day. And that really takes the hills and the wind out of the argument why you would or wouldn't invest in cycling. Ollie, next slide, please. So as I said earlier, we're out now. We've developed what we think is a comprehensive bike network plan, an approach for how we're going to deliver this network over the next 10 years. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. The key thing, though, is that we want to hear from you. We've been running a number of drop-in sessions. Last night I was in Johnsonville, last week I was in Tawa, and the team have been out at other locations. We're in Karori tomorrow night, Island Bay on Thursday night, and then we're out in Newtown. It's part of Newtown on Saturday, and that's part of the joined up Let's Get Wellington Moving, the district plan and our bike network plan engagement. So come along to one of those sessions if you want to provide, hear more, ask questions. What we want to do is hear from you through our website. There's ways to get into that for children as well. So we've got a tamariki zone, and that's had an immense number of kids getting into there. So that's just been fantastic. There's a 10-minute submission if you want to have a sort of a brief submission, but if you want to dive right down the detail and give lots and lots of information, you can be in there for a lot longer and provide that really rich feedback. And we've got the website there, but we'll repeat that throughout the session. So thanks, Esther. That's me.
Wonderful.
And I'll be around on the panel to answer.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Paul, for setting the scene for the urgent need that we have for transport change and bike change in the city. Thank you. And on that note, I'd like to invite Claire Pascoe, Transitional Manager, to hear so that you can hear more detail about the plan itself and how you can use it. Thank you, Claire.
Kia ora koutou. Testing 1, 2, 3. Hopefully that's all working just fine. It's a real privilege to be here tonight to talk about Wellington's Bike Network Plan. The team have put a huge amount of effort into this over the last, well, it's been years really, but certainly over the last few months, and I've sort of dived in from a role at Waka Kotahi and just been really impressed by the kind of enthusiasm and dedication of the team. So it's a privilege to be talking about it with you all tonight. Thanks for coming along. Ollie, we'll move straight on, I think, to the next slide. So this is effectively the 4 components that are in the plan. Paul has already talked a bit about the context piece. So the plan does kind of cover off that again and talk about the rationale or the why we're doing what we're doing and what we're doing, which is effectively building a bike network. And those are 2 decisions, the why and the what, that have already been made. So
Claire, can I just invite you to lower your
yes
a little bit.
Is that better?
Thank you. Carry on.
Okay, cool. So the second part of the bike plan is the network map, and that's the really important part where we're getting into the where of the plan. And this is one of the key things that we are looking for feedback on, and we'll touch on that in more detail in a minute. The plan covers off some of the principles that we will be using to guide some of the decision making about the kind of more detailed aspects to what we put on these parts of the plan. And they also outline the decision making that has gone into deciding some of these routes or having that first go at putting the map together. And then finally, the plan touches on how we will actually make these changes. So both in terms of the delivery approach, when it introduces this rapid acceleration approach that Paul touched on, and it also looks at some of the new processes that we'll be using to deliver the plan as well. So I'm going to touch on each of these in more detail now. Can move, thank you. So here it is. This is the network map that we referred to. It's 147 kilometres of network, and it's made up of a primary, which is the darker green, primary sort of like a spine network, and then a secondary network, which are more of the connector routes. And so think of this map like the bike and e-scooter version of the public transport network map that you may have seen when you're looking to catch a bus, and you can see all the routes the PT goes. The difference between the public transport map and the bike network map is that there is only 13% of this network that is actually in place at the moment. So that's what this whole exercise is about. It's about developing a connected network that gets people from where they are to where they want to go. So some of the analysis that's gone into developing these routes has looked at where people are, where schools are, where town centres are, and where some of those key destinations that people want to go are. And that's, you can see the pink zones and the purple dots on the map. So 147 kilometres, it's a huge extent of network, and it will mean that 155,000 people within the city will live within 5 minutes ride of this network, and that 30,000 people, students, will be within 500 metres of the network. So we're trying to create something that is really widely accessible to the people of Wellington. I guess the thing that is really new in this plan is that it is the first time we have put actual lines on streets. So previously, when we had the master plan, we looked at how we were connecting suburbs conceptually to town. This is about identifying the exact routes, and it's really important that we do that now, because that's one of the key ways that we're looking to speed the process up going forward, is that we've locked in the routes and we don't need to go back and kind of relitigate those again in the future. So the key things mentioned we're looking for feedback on is, have we got these routes right? But also, what impact would this network have on you and your life? So if you don't want to actually provide feedback on the actual streets, you're not as worried about that. You more want to provide feedback on overall, if we had a connected bike network, would that be a positive or a negative impact on you, and how? And we, like Paul mentioned, we're encouraging not just adults to fill this out, but really for kids to think about it too, because those future generations, this is a 10-year plan. This is about creating a city for the future where the kids of today are going to be adults. So we're keen to hear their thoughts as well. Alrighty, we can move on to the next one, Ollie. So I mentioned that the plan covers some principles, and this is a quick overview of those, and there's more detail in the plan. Effectively, this is our, I guess, decision-making framework that helps us guide us as to where we go and what we put down. So first and foremost, we want to create a network that untaps all of that latent demand. So Paul mentioned that our surveys are showing that actually 3/4 of Wellingtonians would like to bike if it was safe and felt safe. So we want to create a network that unlocks all of that, which means that we have to create one that is direct and convenient. So not sending people off on, really hilly, circuitous routes that are very inconvenient. And we need to build it to a standard that can attract people, which means we will be looking to physically separate people on bikes from that faster moving vehicle traffic as much as we can. And in some areas where we can't do that, we'll also be looking at other tools like speed, where we physically can't get that separation in place. It's also really important to us that even though the map is displaying the connected bike network, anytime we are delivering a section of the network, we're thinking about all the modes. So we'll be looking at how we can improve the bus network as we go, how we can improve streets for people walking. It'll be an integrated transport project for each section of the network, and the map is really just showing what it looks like from the bike network connectivity perspective. Excellent, we can move on. So we mentioned that there are two different ways we are looking to approach delivering this network, and Paul mentioned that in May this year the council made a decision that they wanted to accelerate the delivery. So they have pulled forward funding in these first 3 years, of which we're halfway through almost the first one, to deliver as much as we possibly can. And what they asked us to do is use a new method, which is the one that put the Brooklyn Cycleway in last year. So what we saw from that project is by using a different process with materials that didn't change curbs, but we're looking at reallocating the existing corridor using kind of lighter materials, we were able to deliver a bit of the cycle network in about a quarter of the time as doing those more permanent projects, which involve, big concrete, physical civil works and moving curb lines. So we're going to be using both of these approaches, but in the first 3 years, we're going to really be focusing on these interim, what we're calling interim improvements that allow us to go a lot quicker. That means that we won't always be, we won't be producing projects that look like the beautiful Cobham Drive all the time, but it does mean that we should be able to speed up the pace of change. And you'll notice in these pictures, there are plants and trees in there. One of the things we're also looking to do is the council has a green network plan, and we'll be looking to pick up as much as we can the incorporation of greenery and plants into our projects. They're not going to be everywhere, but every little pocket of space we think we can add in something green, we will look to do that as well. So talked about these interim projects. These photos here just give you a bit of a feel for what we're talking about. So they're lighter materials. They're not perfect looking, but they do allow us to fix them and tweak them a lot easier than that more permanent infrastructure. We will also be looking for opportunities throughout these projects for the community to get involved through participation. It might take us a little while sometimes to figure out where those opportunities are, and we're really open to hearing from the community about how you'd like to participate, certainly with the materials that we use, and potentially even installing some of the materials in the off-street environments. We're going to be looking for ways for people to get involved. So there can be this really kind of shared sense of pride and ownership in some of these sections of network. This slide here is really talking to that process change. So there has been a large-scale public engagement last year on the parking policy, and that has been approved and adopted by council and will be a guiding document for us in terms of how we manage parking. So we don't have to reinvent a method for managing parking as we go. We've got a parking policy that's already been out for public consultation and has been approved to guide us. This is the part of the process where we're doing the citywide engagement on the plan, which includes that map. And we will trying to kind of encourage as many people as we can to feedback on this stage. And what we'll be doing in March when we approve this plan is we'll be looking to do a network-wide traffic resolution, which is really signalling to the city that on these routes you can expect over the next 3 to 10 years the streets to change, because this has been identified as part of the bike network. And all of that wide public engagement allows us then on those sections of network to come in and use this interim approach much quicker. So we will be working with the directly affected parties along the route and letting them know what's happening, but the major public engagement will actually come through experiencing the routes themselves and opening feedback up once the installations are in to get that kind of feedback that allows us to tweak and then take to council a final decision on a more permanent layout. So that's some of the ways that we're hoping to start moving faster. And on that note, we are already underway with 2 of these. So there are 2 projects that are effectively kind of no-brainer routes. They're very high demand areas. So coming into the city from the west and coming into the city from the south, where there are currently no provisions for people biking. We've got connections from the north and the east, but these are kind of completing those central connections into the city. So the planning and the design work for these are underway. Then we've got some targeted engagement happening with the businesses along the route, the key organisations like the hospital, talking to the fire service, the police. So those people where the designs, taxis are really, we can get insight from them for the design. But we're looking to install these in the first half of next year. And then we will be opening up for public feedback on them before we would take them to council for a traffic resolution using that feedback. So it's exciting to be getting going, and we'll be using these first 2 projects to learn a lot about the process. They're kind of our training grounds. They include a lot of complexity. There's lots of intersections. There's lots of constrained corridors in here, and we'll learn heaps. And the idea is that we'll be using all of that learning and in this practice to be able to scale up and go faster in the next 2 years. So just finally, just a recap of where we are right now. So we're not consulting on this plan whilst doing nothing else. There's a huge amount of work that's actually underway in the delivery space already. So Evans Bay, Miramar Cutting and Island Bay are all moving into the construction phases. We've already talked about these 2 interim projects that are underway. And of course, there's a lot of work happening through Let's Get Wellington for moving for parts of the city, Central City Bike Network as well. But at the end of this consultation period, we'll be collating that feedback. We will also be doing the work to prioritise and program when we will do which bits of the network, and we will take that to council in March for a decision. And from there, we will be starting to really scale up to deliver on the plan. And that's pretty much everything from me. I think I'll hand back over to Esther.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for laying out very clearly the plan that's coming to us. A lot of innovation in there. Thank you. So just a reminder about how you can lodge your questions via the question and answer panel. We've already got some coming in, and I see that some have been sent to me to ask. Some of your questions can be answered live. Bridget and Lynn are working on that, and we'll be focusing on the citywide network questions rather than specific questions about your area. If you want more information about your area, what's happening on your street, go online, check out the interactive maps and diagrams, and you may get more information there. So on that note, I'd like to invite our panel in. Claire and Paul, if you could come back along with Joe. So you have met Paul and Claire, understood a little bit about their work, but Joe, could you just perhaps let the audience know about your role in Paneke Pōneke?
My role is to is the primary author of the bike network plan, and my role going forward will be around assessing the feedback we get to the plan and adjusting it and recommending the final plan to council in March next year.
As you can hear, this team and your council and me are very interested to get your feedback, and would be reminding you again about how you can do that at the end. So let's kick off, and we're going to focus first on the questions that you have already sent in to us. And the first question up, Joe, I might start with you. How have these routes been chosen, and does the network all link up?
Yeah, so you might recall from the plans that came up, particularly when Claire was talking about the 147 kilometre bike network, that was basically designed around connecting the CBD to the key centres, to the north, Tawa and Johnsonville, to the west, to Karori, out to the eastern suburbs and to the south. We then, and that's the spine network, or the primary network as we called it. We added to that network then connections from that spine to local centres, the smaller centres, and to the schools. And that gave us the network that we are now consulting on.
Excellent, thank you. We've got quite a lot of questions about safety, so I'll be interspersing those a little bit. Claire, how will you be making safe, separated bicycle lanes in Wellington, particularly in light of narrow and busy streets?
Yeah, so if you live in Wellington, you have an understanding of the challenge that we have ahead of us. We have a fantastic topography and a compact city, which makes this so great, but it certainly makes building cycling networks tricky. Everything that you see on that map will not look the same. So some parts of the network, we are physically going to be unable to create physically separated parts of cycle network just because of the geography and the geometry of the street. But we will be looking as much as we can to reallocate space so that we can create that physical separation on as much of it as we can. Like I mentioned earlier, we'll also be looking at using speed in some areas, and we'll be looking at using things like traffic signals where bikes can get a head start. So for instance, if we have a really tricky intersection, we might have to give them a head start through an intersection that can actually separate them through time rather than through space. So that's a tool in the toolbox. It's a slightly more time consuming and complex one, but there are really a range of design options for us, but there's no doubt that some of these streets are going to be complex and in some instance will have trade-offs because of all the different demands on them.
You're going to get a lot of experience of that in Wellington. Claire, I'm going to ask you a supplementary question. I'll just ask you to pop your speaker down just a little bit further. I've got a great question here from the panel. Will the bike paths be able to accommodate wide-wheeled vehicles like mobility scooters and tricycles?
Yeah, I can touch on that for mobility scooters. So at the moment in New Zealand, mobility scooters are designed for the footpath. So they travel at speeds that are more aligned with pedestrians rather than the speeds of the vehicles in the bike lane. So currently, mobility scooters would still be using the footpath. There's a package of work that's looking at which vehicles use which bits of the street, but that's the current situation.
Right, and those other kind, because we're seeing a lot more micro wheels. Where will
so e-scooters, where we have created these physically separated lanes, we would expect e-scooters to use that section of the street. We're also waiting for a rule change that will mean anywhere there's a cycle lane, we would expect scooters to be using that space.
Nice. Paul, when will detailed designs of each route be developed?
Yeah, look, that's I think the beauty of this plan. So if you think about the way we do it now, Evans Bay is one of those that we've gone into. We've designed it ourselves, and we've taken a design out to the community to share, and we've just received over 1,000 submissions on that design. That's an awfully long process. This process going forward, Claire's talked about the way we'll put these transitional projects out on the street, and that's going to be most of the design is going to come from that. So we'll be able to get the detailed design based on what we've experienced. In some cases, those transitional designs would be out for a few months before we then start working on the detailed design to make it into the transformation. At other times, the transitional projects may be there for 6 to 7 years before we then work on that more detailed design. So that means that we can learn from what we've seen.
So quite a staggered plan, and we're getting questions about that from you right now. We'll ask later at the end about implementation and speed as well. So Joe, another safety question. How well or how has safety been considered for all users of the streets?
Yeah, great question. Look, safety is a primary consideration and has been for many, many years when we're designing the transport network. Different users need different levels of service, different experiences so that they feel safe. One of the key things through our design process is a process called the safety audit, where our design plans are subject to a specific review, both during the planning process and at pre-opening. So, that adjustments can be made to ensure we get the best safety outcomes we can.
And how will you be monitoring that? So in your planning, it's clearly all the way through, but what about once it's implemented?
Yeah, so the council has access to the crash analysis system. That's Waka Kotahi's crash database. Every time someone has a crash and reports that to the police, or the police attend the incident, that gets entered into the database. People at the council and other places actually, can look at that data online and evaluate the system kind of regularly. We typically do that on an annual or every few years basis, depending on what it is. Obviously, new things tend to be looked at more closely, and older things tend to be looked at, as and when that's appropriate.
Very good. So, you're deeply embedded in your planning and ongoing. Clear.
Always a consideration.
Yeah. Just wanted to add in there that one of the really integral parts of the interim projects is a really robust monitoring and evaluation plan for them. So looking at not just the crash data, which sometimes hides some of the safety issues around pedestrians and cyclists, because if we make it so dangerous, there are none, which makes it look like there's not a problem. So we'll also be monitoring things like how safe people feel before and after, so that we can remember that what we started with wasn't wasn't particularly safe either, because sometimes that's what kind of we lose sight of when we introduce something, is the comparison between what we had, which is the whole rationale for what we're doing, and what we've got now.
Very good.
And the other data, one last thing that we'll be looking at, not just crash data, but we'll be looking at things like vehicle speeds, which are a really good indicator of safety. So where we can bring speeds down, we know we've achieved a safety improvement.
Very good. And I'm imagining that residents will be continuing to ask questions and have comments on safety as these roll out. Paul, we, of course, I think probably not so much for this audience, because most of the people in this audience think that pathways and cycling is important, but we do get a lot of questions, I know, about, or you get a lot of questions about car parks. So tell us about scaling back car parks.
No, and absolutely a great question, and that's car parking is really what's held us back so far. So a big change. Claire talked about the adoption of parking policy, and that sets out the process by we will go about allocating space. So it sets out the need for a parking management plan, and a parking management plan will look at how we allocate space. Clearly, if this bike network plan corridor, the network itself is adopted as Joe set out, that will then give priority to movement along those corridors over storage of the private motor vehicles. So that's a policy decision from council. Then how do we manage the parking that's left, or the parking in the side roads? Now, our parking policy sets out how we'll do that. So we'll run a parking management plan. We'll prioritise the car share. We'll prioritise mobility parking, EV charging, and at last of all will be commuters that want to park in those streets. So there's a hierarchy that's quite set out. So it's quite a process that we'll need to go through, and we will involve the community as we develop that for those longer term projects. The beauty we've got with our transitional program is that we're able to see those effects straight away and tweak and adapt to them.
So what you're doing is actually enacting something that's already been decided by council those months ago.
And that's right. And the parking policy is just as applicable for putting in bus lanes, making safety improvements, allocating space around town centres for livability reasons. So if we want to remove a car park to create space for people, it's applying that parking policy evenly across all of those projects. It's not just for the cyclists.
Very good. Very good. So, Claire, there was a question here from a participant, obviously pro-biking. How to make more progress with bike and people-friendly streets when the car lobby seems so powerful? I'm thinking we're not seeing a lot of that in this webinar, but what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say over the last couple of years, the context has really changed. So this isn't really about biking anymore. This is about a city adapting to, like Paul was talking about, a climate crisis and a housing crisis. So what we know is that our population is going to be growing in the central city, and we simply don't have enough space for everybody to get around in the way that we have been doing that over the last few decades. We have the highest car ownership rates in the world, but we know that people that are going to be moving into the central city will be moving to lifestyles where they want access to a vehicle, but they don't necessarily want to own them. And some of the planning changes around district plans and minimum car parking requirements have meant that that is a reality for us to deal with. So I think in the past, maybe the conversation about cycling has almost sat in the nice to have basket, and that's been partly why it's been hard to progress, but it's really firmly in the this is a critical part of our response to future-proofing our city basket now, and I think that really changes the game, and the council has demonstrated this year that they're very, very committed to delivering on this, and we're here not to ask why or what anymore. We're simply talking about how, and we want to get on with it, which is what the city expects from us now.
Very good. The city also expects a lot of wind, and Joe, we have a question here from a participant. Wellington's weather can be challenging. Why put cycling routes in high wind zones, particularly around the coasts?
Yeah, well, I think the first part of the answer is high wind zones. You know, on a bad day, you can't beat Wellington on a good day, and on a bad day, you won't be hiding from the wind. But you know, certainly what we've seen is Paul demonstrated earlier that the numbers of people on bikes, you know, that we're out there measuring for 20 odd years now, is continuing to grow. You know, and that's clearly despite the wind. There has been wind over the last 20 years, I can assure you. In a similar way, you know, Claire touched on, no, it was Paul actually, wasn't it? Touched on the uptake of electric bikes, and again, you know, that technological boost will undoubtedly continue and eliminate some of the effects of the wind. Obviously, on some days it will be too windy to comfortably ride a bike, and people will choose to get around in a different way, and that's fine, as they do now.
So it's about choice, giving people choice.
It is about choice. It's enabling choice.
And it's not windy every day.
It's certainly
even at Evans Bay. Claire, some businesses, or a participant is asking, how do you estimate effects on businesses, especially for shoppers who need to carry heavy goods or older or not very mobile? What's the effect?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it has a very long answer, so I'll try not to warble on too long. But the first thing to note is that the parks that Paul talked about, how the parking policy sets out different priorities for parks. So things like loading zones, short-term parking, and mobility parking are all parks that we will be working really, really hard to move. If we're looking to take them off one part of the street, we'll be looking for a place to move them, and that's already happening for these Newtown and Bowen Street. So for instance, we're talking to the taxi drivers about the taxi stands, and outside the businesses where there are short-term stays, where can we put them if we're moving them? But at I guess a bigger level, in a central city, in a bustling central city, people generally don't expect to park right outside the business that they want to go to. They plan ahead. We've got 29,000 parks off street in Wellington City, and there's actually only 3,000 on the street. So when we put it in perspective, we'll be talking about a very small percentage of the parks in the city that we will be reallocating. And I guess the nature of shopping, and we've seen this certainly with COVID and things, has changed over the last few years, and we would expect that to continue to change. So lots of businesses have delivery services. They have clever ways of getting things to people, and we've seen them adapt through COVID. So I guess in that part of designing a city for the future is not just getting our streets right, but it's starting to think about how our businesses operate, and there will be some adapting in those areas too.
Very good. So that's an interesting point about the percentage. It might feel like a lot in some spaces, but actually overall the percentage is quite low.
Yeah, and the other, just final point, sorry, on that one, what we do know is that cities that are inviting for people to walk and cycle are cities where there are more people in those spaces and there are more shoppers. So even though it can seem sort of counterintuitive, because it seems like we're taking customers away because we think that the only customers going to a business are the ones that have driven and parked immediately outside, actually for a lot of businesses in the central city, the vast majority of their customers don't park right outside because there's only a very limited space. And so a city that is really designing itself to attract the maximum amount of people to come and spend time there is the city that really benefits, the businesses benefit from, and that's kind of the long-term picture.
Great, thank you. We've got a few more questions from pre-registrations, and then we've got some great questions coming up through the audience live now, so thank you very much for that. Another parking question, I'm going to pitch this one to you, Joe. Is council planning for car parking facilities for those who need a car and on-road parking that's been taken away?
Yeah, sure. That you know, is covered by the breadth of policy settings in the parking policy, and those will be applied to that situation. As Paul mentioned, where the scale of change in a place is big enough, that will warrant a parking management plan, which will be a more thorough, you know, look at parking on the affected street and the surrounding area to make sure that all the remaining parking is managed in a way that best meets the needs of that area.
Very good. Okay, and we've got a suggestion here too. Here's a suggestion: get an e-bike hire companies on board or stationed near new cycleways so people can hire a bike and try cycling that way. What's your thoughts, Claire?
Yeah, I think it's an amazing thought. And those are definitely the sorts of things that we're looking at the moment to wrap this infrastructure rollout. So what we know from around the world is that you can roll out infrastructure and you definitely get an increase in numbers, but you get an even bigger increase if you wrap it with initiatives and activities that support people to use it. And so we are currently working on a kind of a program of those sorts of initiatives. It may not just be cycling, it could be encouraging car share or other things. So we're working on a suite of those, but even at the moment, places like Switched On Bikes down on the Wellington waterfront, they will rent you an e-bike, and we definitely encourage people to look for opportunities to give them a go.
So it's already happening. It's already happening, and you're expecting more of that. So let's take some live questions. Oh, I do like this. Why will it take 10 years to implement? Oh, who's going to take that one? Some people want you to speed it up, Paul.
Look, that we talked about this 3-year program. The challenge that Claire's taken on is to try and get the entire network in place within 3 years in a transitional way. The council, in appreciating that that's going to be difficult at this stage, is where, while business cases are needed to sort of demonstrate that there is benefits to be had with the need to attract the subsidy from Waka is not there. So if we can, great, but it's about that rapid rollout of that network. The transformational program, which is that longer term 10-year program, is the bigger part of the spend, and that will come and take those light touch materials and make them long term. We're absolutely hoping that the long-term version is very similar to the transitional, but again, if we put the transitional out and we monitor it and evaluate it, and people tell us that actually it's not that good, it'd be better if it was in a different way, that's what the transformational project will roll out. The expectation is, though, that transformational program, the bigger part of the spend, the sort of the 180 million of the 220 million, that would have to attract subsidy from Waka. But that is a lot more business casing. It's a lot more analysis to ensure that we are getting that return on that investment, and that's where it takes a little longer to get that planning right. And when we put that in place, we're putting in place with permanent materials that we expect to last 70 to 80 years. So
this is about investment, phasing, and trying things out.
The first 3 years we try it out, get it right, then we will follow up and get it implemented.
Nice. I do hope that was a useful answer to that question. Claire.
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the other reasons, I guess we can't kind of do it overnight, is that there are some real actual constraints out around in terms of we're not the only thing trying to build stuff in the city right now. So Let's Get Wellington Moving has a massive program. Part of that is this bike network. There is huge construction and housing development happening. There is a real strain on contractor resources, on materials. So I guess there's an element of being realistic about some of those constraints that are likely to mean that we can't scale everything in a few years.
Yep, great. It's a pretty ambitious plan. We've got a few more questions. We are actually coming to the end of our webinar, but while we still have most of the people online, I'm going to continue taking, there's probably half a dozen more questions, which will put us a little bit over time. Panel and Ollie, you happy with that? Sure. Great, let's take it. As soon as I start to see people falling off, we'll start to wrap this. Paul, how much has the council spent on the bike paths on the parade in Island Bay, and will we spend at a similar rate on the rest of the network?
I missed the second part of that question. I was a bit unclear on, but in terms of what we've spent, so the scheme that's in place, which is the 1.7 kilometres from D Street down to Reef Street, both sides of the road. We put that in place back in 2014. I think Joe can correct me, 1.8 million was spent on that 1.7 kilometres to get that network in place. So that was the capital cost to put that in place.
Yep, compared to the 220 million you've got.
Yeah, and the second part of that question, I just repeat that.
Yes. And will we spend at a similar rate on the rest of the network? Is that what it costs? Or have we got this down and got it cheaper?
Can I throw that to Joe, who's developed the network, and we've got that rough order of costing.
Yeah, thanks. It's a very complicated question to answer straightly, but I think the short answer is that Island Bay, as a design concept, really didn't go far enough in a lot of elements, and we would expect to actually need to invest more in that corridor. To do that corridor to the kind of standard we desire in the long term, recent estimates have suggested that that's more like $14 million for that same length. The transitional program will definitely be doing, a lighter touch, using temporary materials and not necessarily, or probably not moving curbs unless that's really, really necessary. The transformation program will certainly involve curbs and concrete and probably quite significant changes to intersections. That's why the cost, is currently estimated around that $180 odd million for the transition program. That's
great.
Last time we did the numbers on that. Yep.
Great. Let's take a few more questions, but let's speed up your answers. So good folks can go off and have their supper. This is a nice question for you, Joe. I think we'll send that to you. Will we include awareness campaigns for drivers to avoid safety issues like dooring? Is that part of your plan here?
I think that is part of the plan. Yes.
Great. Excellent.
So that's part of the
we'll also be
activities. Go on, Claire.
I was just going to say, one of the primary ways we're going to try and avoid dooring is not building our infrastructure in a way that puts you in a position to be doored. So that's going to be our primary response to dooring. But yeah, there will be a sort of behaviour change campaign. I don't think they've determined yet who's it going to be targeting or how yet. But
that's part of the plan. Very good. Claire, what proportion of routes are planned to be delivered via the interim approach? And what are the difficulties of doing the entire network in an interim way, including Let's Get Wellington leaving routes? Why can't we just do it all like that?
Yeah, so I think we will be looking to do as much of it as we can like that, and we haven't yet. And one of the pieces of work that we are just sort of starting, but we will be finishing by Christmas, is some of this prioritizing and sequencing of each segment. So we are now breaking the network down into those smaller segments and looking at, will this be an interim? If so, when would we schedule it in? Versus there might be a reason that it's not possible to do something in an interim fashion. I think what we'll see a bit of is the interim program looking at compromises that do allow us to go faster. So there might be sections where we can put an uphill cycleway, but not a downhill like Brooklyn has done. And that is what is interim. And because we know the bigger speed differentials are on the uphill, that's where we get a big amount of benefit. So those are the sorts of things that we might see in the interim, and we'll be doing as much of the network as we can.
So these decisions are both a science and an art, aren't they? A lot of detailed analysis, a lot of detailed analysis, but also thinking.
Yeah, I was going to say there's no such thing as a perfect answer. There are a lot of compromises required through the space reallocation process, and not every desire in terms of level of service can be achieved.
So Claire,
and bearing in,
in terms of these targets, in terms of what you're trying to do in the implementation plan, are you trying to install a certain number of kilometres every year? How is that playing out?
Yeah, we're going to have more clarity around that sort of thing when we finish the scheduling exercise. So I would say by March, when we take this to council, we will have more information about, and next year we'll be doing these kilometres, and the year after we'll be doing these kilometres.
Very good. Okay, we're going to start wrapping up now. Oh, but I can't resist this little question that's arrived. Joe, what is being done to show businesses the benefits of cycle commuting customers such as cities like Copenhagen, Portland?
Well, I think that that's happening through the transition program. Obviously, part of the implementation and talking to the neighbours is having those conversations. Perhaps Claire can elaborate a little bit more on that.
Sorry, I got distracted for a second reading questions. Can you repeat it, Esther?
What's being done to show business the benefits of cycle commuting customers?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the premises of the interim projects is that we are going to demonstrate the benefits. So rather than using a lot of modelling and we reckon this will happen, and we do a lot of kind of reckons in transport planning sometimes, we're going to actually demonstrate. So the idea is we'll put these things in and we will monitor. So for our two first projects, we've got, for instance, some evaluation of business activity along the route. So we can actually track the impact on businesses and the benefits of it. So I think show rather than tell is the philosophy of the transitional program.
Great. And you'll be communicating about that to businesses and to the city and to residents?
Yeah, so businesses in particular, when we're working on a section of the network, we will have that has businesses along it. We have a specific engagement plan to talk to the businesses. So they're one of the key stakeholders that we talk to before we put it in. Excellent. Whereas the wider public will be more engaged once it's in.
Okay, very good, excellent. Different strokes for different folks. So I'm going to send you one more question. I think actually we've got those. When do we start, Claire? When do we start?
Yesterday. we started. So I think we're going, but yep. I guess the invitation right now is for everybody here to take a look through in more detail and get in and fill out that the engagement form. And the real action right now is for Wellington City to tell us their views. Meanwhile, and we're sort of furiously continuing on with those projects that are underway.
So let's hear from businesses. Let's hear from listeners now. Ollie, if you could launch our last poll. Based on what you've heard today, how would you like to be contributing feedback? If you could launch that poll for us, Ollie, it would be useful for us to hear. Tick as many as you would like, whether you're thinking of making a written submission, an oral submission, you just came along to listen tonight, perhaps you want to encourage your tamariki or rangatahi to make a submission, let us know. Because as you've heard, we're very keen, or council is very keen to hear from you, get your feedback now, but also throughout the process. How are we going, Ollie?
Yeah, about 80%. We'll close it off at 90.
Yep.
There we go.
Very good. So Ollie's going to share those results so you can see what you said. Fantastic. So nearly 80% of you are planning to make a written submission. Oh my goodness. 30% an oral submission. Lots of you encouraging your tamariki in the rangatahi. That's fantastic news. Thank you very much. We'll close out of that poll now. Stay where you are, panel. We'll just put up a last slide that reminds you of how you can make your submissions. So you can reach out to your local ward councillors, go online to the bike network at wcc.gov.nz. In there, you'll find a whole lot more. Stay on the line, Claire, stay on the line. A whole lot more information, ways to submit, interactive videos. And if you didn't get your question answered tonight, ask it there, email the team at WCC. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everybody who was involved, speakers, crew behind the scenes, Ollie, Lynn and Bridget and everybody else who contributed to putting this together, particularly you, our audience, giving up your evenings for this experience, or maybe you were listening afterwards. And we will close as we started with karakia. Me inoi tātou. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te urutapa nui, kia wātea, kia māma, ki te arataka tā. Ko ia rā e rongo, whakairia aki ki ronga. Haumi e, hui e, tā iki e. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your submissions. Ka kite.